Welcome to the deep dive. I've got a question for you today. What actually defines a real man?
Oh, wow. Starting with the easy stuff, I see.
Right. I mean, is it that rugged, solitary figure we always see in pop culture? You know, the guy who never shows emotion, the lone wolf, the guy who thinks his only real job is just to provide the paycheck? Or is it something entirely different?
Yeah, it's a question that instantly muddies the waters,
Yeah,
especially for anyone trying to navigate family dynamics right now.
exactly.
Because, the cultural definitions of masculinity, they're shifting so incredibly fast. And the expectations placed on fathers and husbands are just constantly being rewritten,
Totally.
and often in ways that totally contradict each other.
Which is exactly why the source material we're looking at today is so compelling.
Right.
We're diving into a very specific, totally countercultural framework for fatherhood.
Right.
So our source today is a translated transcript of a Father's Day sermon. It's from a YouTube video titled Fellowship Sunday Service, 21 June 2026, and it was uploaded by a channel called LEF Atanagar.
And I think it's worth noting right off the bat that this isn't, it's not a sociological study.
Right, yeah.
It's not a clinical psychology paper. It is a theological address.
Mm.
But the behavioral frameworks the speaker uses, how he defines masculinity, responsibility, family structure, they're deeply psychological.
Oh, absolutely.
He's addressing the root causes of why households fracture.
Yeah, and whether you're a parent listening to this right now or maybe someone interested in theology or honestly just fascinated by relationship dynamics, this sermon offers a really striking look at what it means to lead by serving.
Right.
So our mission today is to unpack this. We're going to explore this concept of the husband as the family pastor. We'll look at the hidden dangers of male passivity, and we're going to examine this fascinating comparison between the biblical figures of Adam and Jesus regarding blame.
It's a really unique comparison.
It is. But what's wild is that the sermon actually starts by kind of ignoring fatherhood entirely.
Right. It makes this incredibly bold claim about the marital unit. The speaker basically argues that if a man wants to be a good father, he actually has to, stop focusing on his kids for a second.
Which sounds completely backwards.
It does.
Huh.
He says the man needs to look at his wife. And to ground this, he quotes Jay Adams, a very prominent historical figure in the biblical counseling movement.
Right.
And Adams said that the absolute best way to be a good father to your children is to be a good husband to their mother.
So the text is establishing this very strict hierarchy of attention. Like, you literally cannot be a good father while neglecting your wife.
Exactly. The marital unit has to come first.
But, I mean, why is that the absolute foundation? Let's say I'm a dad, right? And I'm spending 3 hours a day playing catch with my kid. How am I failing them just because my relationship with my wife is maybe a bit distant?
Because children get their fundamental sense of security from the stability of the home's architecture.
Oh, the architecture. That makes sense.
Right. It's not just from the entertainment or the direct attention they receive. If that core partnership, marriage, is fractured or cold or even just purely transactional, the child senses that instability.
They pick up on the vibe.
Exactly. The speaker's point is that prioritizing the mother models healthy love. And it creates this secure environment where the kid isn't forced to navigate adult tensions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And building on that, the speaker introduces a historical concept that I just found fascinating.
The family pastor.
Yes, the family pastor or family priest. He points out that this terminology was drawn from the early Puritans. And he has this little historical side note, which is interesting, mentioning that those early Puritans traveled to America for their faith, not for business or money.
Right, which he claims is the primary reason people cross oceans today.
Right, yeah. A little jab there. But bringing up the Puritans is highly intentional. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Because in Puritan communities, religion wasn't compartmentalized. It wasn't just, oh, we go to this single building on this specific day of the week. The household was considered a microcosm of the church. And the husband was literally expected to be the family pastor. Like, it was his daily duty to lead the family spiritually, emotionally, morally.
And if you're listening to this, maybe driving in your car right now, you might be thinking about how in our modern world, we do the exact opposite.
We really do.
We outsource absolutely everything.
Everything.
We outsource education to the school system. If there's a discipline problem, we outsource it to therapists or boarding schools, which, by the way, the speaker explicitly calls out in the transcript.
He does, yeah.
And we outsource spiritual or moral growth to, what, a 1 or 2 hour Sunday church service? Or maybe a youth group.
Yeah.
So why does this speaker view that kind of spiritual outsourcing as such a fundamental failure?
Well, because outsourcing shifts the burden of modeling behavior from the parent to a stranger. The speaker argues that relying on an hour or two of church a week is just entirely insufficient for spiritual formation. I mean, think about it. What are children realistically absorbing in a single hour of programmed instruction compared to the hundreds of hours they spend watching their parents at home?
The ratio is just way off.
Exactly. Spiritual leadership in this framework is a daily grind. It's an everyday requirement.
And to illustrate that daily grind, the sermon references Paul Washer. He's a well-known, often very intense preacher. And the speaker highlights how Washer introduces himself publicly, using this kind of identity hierarchy.
Yeah, Washer's hierarchy is super revealing.
How does it go again?
He lists his titles in a very specific order. Number 1, husband. Number 2, father. Number 3, missionary and preacher. And then finally, director of his missions agency.
I gotta admit, seeing that hierarchy in print felt completely alien to how modern professionals operate.
Oh, for sure.
If you meet a guy at a dinner party today, the very first thing he says is, I'm a director at a tech firm, or I'm a senior partner.
Right, the career comes first.
Always. Putting your role as a husband and father above your career is almost viewed as, like, a lack of ambition in our current culture.
And that is the exact cultural current the speaker is pushing against. In this worldview, career and financial provision are completely secondary to being a present spiritual leader in the home.
So provision isn't enough.
No, the speaker emphasizes that a man cannot just be a provider. If a father thinks his only job is to earn money, deposit in the bank, and let his wife handle the actual child rearing,
Which happens a lot.
it does. But he says that man is going to regret it immensely. His primary job is to teach, to understand, and to love his wife. If he isn't preparing himself daily to lead his family, much like a pastor prepares for a Sunday service, he's failing the role.
Okay, but holding that Paul Washer identity hierarchy, trying to be a family pastor every single day, that sounds like a massive, exhausting undertaking.
It's huge.
If a man's expected to lead and guide constantly, my immediate fear is that it just devolves into micromanaging tyranny.
Right, like he just becomes a dictator.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a recipe for a really overbearing, suffocating household.
Well, the sermon actually anticipates that exact fear, and it addresses it directly through the lens of discipline and authority. The speaker references a well-known biblical warning from Ephesians 6.4.
Which says what?
It explicitly commands fathers not to provoke their children to anger.
And the way he defines provoking
Yeah.
is so practical, because he doesn't just mean, don't annoy them.
Yeah.
He says provocation happens when discipline is fundamentally unjust.
Right. And this touches on a really deep psychological reality about authority. To explain what unjust discipline looks like, the speaker uses this analogy of a school teacher.
Okay.
Imagine a teacher walking into a classroom on a Tuesday and just handing out a massive, heavily weighted exam on material they never actually bothered to teach.
The students would absolutely riot.
They would, because it violates their innate sense of fairness.
Right.
They are provoked to anger because the expectation placed on them is entirely unreasonable. And the speaker warns that fathers do this in their homes all the time.
Wait, how so?
They're checked out. They aren't doing the daily teaching. They haven't set clear expectations. And then suddenly they blow up in anger when a child makes a mistake.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They demand perfection on an exam they never taught.
That frames the role of a father so differently. It isn't about enforcing rules. It's about providing the curriculum.
Exactly.
Which brings us to this incredibly vivid analogy the speaker uses about how that daily teaching should actually look. The steering wheel analogy.
I love this one. It's a brilliant visualization of what healthy, active authority looks like in practice.
Right, so he compares discipline to teaching a child how to drive a car or ride a scooter. When you first teach a teenager to drive, you don't just sit in the passenger seat, stare at your phone, and hope they figure out the pedals.
That would be terrifying.
It would end in disaster. You physically put your hands on the steering wheel right over their hands. You are actively guiding every single movement. But as they learn the mechanics, you slowly, incrementally start to remove your hands.
You let them feel the weight of the control.
Yes. But here is the critical part of the analogy. Discipline isn't waiting for the car to crash into a brick wall and then screaming at the driver.
Right.
Discipline is making daily 1-degree course corrections. Just gently nudging the wheel back on track before disaster strikes.
But the mechanism behind those 1-degree course corrections requires the father to actually be in the passenger seat,
He has to be awake.
awake and paying attention every single day. You
Yeah.
cannot make a subtle correction if you aren't in the car.
Right.
And this loops right back to why the speaker believes outsourcing is so dangerous. If a father delegates the moral training to a school or a youth group and only steps in when a massive accident happens, like when the kid is completely off the rails.
His sudden attempt to grab the wheel is going to cause whiplash.
Exactly. It's too late for a 1-degree correction.
So how does that daily steering tie into earning a child's respect? Because the sermon makes a very sharp distinction here, arguing that fathers cannot simply demand respect by virtue of their title.
Right.
They have to actively earn it.
And this is where the framework gets incredibly challenging, I think, for modern men who might be totally exhausted by their careers. The speaker addresses fathers who are constantly absent. Maybe they travel constantly for work.
Or maybe they're physically there sitting on the couch, but they're mentally checked out.
Exactly. Scrolling on a phone, leaving all the heavy lifting of parenting and household management to the mother. The speaker says these fathers essentially become guests in their own homes.
Oh, man. Becoming a guest in your own home, that is a brutal phrase.
It really is.
If you're listening to this and you think about your own childhood, or maybe even your own current living situation, you could probably picture exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, because the psychology of a guest is that they have no real skin in the game. And a guest certainly doesn't have the moral authority to suddenly stand up and demand the respect of the household. If a father hasn't been doing the unglamorous daily grind, the presence, the gentle steering, the 1-degree corrections, he loses the right to suddenly act like the boss.
So earning respect is intrinsically tied to proximity and effort.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established what this active daily leadership is supposed to look like. The gentle steering, prioritizing the marriage, refusing to be a guest. But then the sermon provides this stark theological contrast of what happens when a man fails to lead.
Yeah, and it frames this failure in a really unexpected way, not as an act of toxic dominance or aggression, but as an act of total devastating passivity.
The speaker completely dismantles the cultural lie of what makes a real man. He references the theologian John Piper, who talked about the old Marlboro Man billboards.
Oh, yeah, the imagery of the macho guy, muscular, leaning against a fence with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth.
The stoic lone wolf. The billboard literally carried the tagline, "Where a man belongs."
Sure.
And this sermon rejects that image entirely. The speaker argues that the lone wolf is not a real man. A real man, in this framework, is the one sitting at the bedside of his sick children, leading them in prayer.
Right, he's up early, sacrificing sleep, seeking vision for his family.
Exactly. Masculinity is defined entirely through active service and presence, not solitary toughness.
Yes.
And to drive this point home, the speaker gives what I think is a wild, deeply controversial psychological read on the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. He calls it the tale of two Adams.
It's a fascinating interpretation.
But wait, hold on. I have to challenge this. Because if you grew up in a Sunday school environment, the story of Adam and Eve is entirely about disobedience.
Right, eating the apple.
Yeah, it's about humanity breaking a direct rule and eating the forbidden fruit. Blaming Adam's passivity feels like a massive rewrite of the traditional narrative. How does the speaker justify taking the focus off the actual rule breaking?
By focusing intensely on the geography and the dialogue of the text itself. The speaker points out that Adam wasn't off in another part of the garden when the serpent approached Eve.
He wasn't.
No, according to the text, Adam was right there with her. He was physically present, but entirely silent.
Why?
He stood there, watched his wife navigate this massive moral test alone, and simply participated in the outcome. He was the ultimate passive husband.
He literally watched her take the fall.
Yes. And then, when the consequences finally arrive, when God shows up and asks Adam what happened, Adam's immediate response isn't to own the failure. He literally points at Eve and says, "The woman you gave me."
The woman you gave me. Wow.
That is the crux of the speaker's argument. Adam doesn't just pass the buck, he shifts the blame to his wife and subtly to God for giving him the wife.
Right.
The speaker says this blame shifting is the ultimate hallmark of passive, broken masculinity. He uses a phrase to describe this moment that is incredibly sharp. Adam sacrificed his wife to justify himself.
Sacrificed his wife to justify himself. I mean, you don't even have to be religious to see how that exact dynamic plays out in toxic relationships today.
Oh, absolutely.
When the pressure hits, the passive partner throws the other person under the bus to save their own ego, We see it in marriages, we see it in corporate boardrooms.
It's the instinct of self-preservation at the expense of the person you're supposed to be protecting. If you encounter a man who habitually shifts blame onto his circumstances, his coworkers, or his spouse, the speaker warns that you are looking at a passive man.
A man who refuses to carry the weight of responsibility.
Exactly.
So the sermon then pivots to the counterexample to offer a solution. It introduces the second Adam, which is how the New Testament refers to Jesus Christ. And Jesus is presented here as the perfect model of masculinity, specifically because he behaves in the exact opposite manner of the first Adam.
Right. Where Adam was passive and silent, Jesus was active and vocal. But the vital contrast the speaker makes is regarding their relationship to blame.
The blame game again.
Yes. Adam shifted the blame to his bride to save his own skin. Jesus, the speaker notes, took the guilt of his bride, which theologically is the church, entirely upon himself.
So instead of pointing a finger and saying, it's her fault, he steps forward and says, put it on me.
Yes. And the speaker's phrasing mirrors his critique of Adam perfectly. He says Jesus sacrificed himself to justify the church.
Framing Adam's primary sin as passivity and blame shifting completely redefines how a lot of people might think about leadership.
Totally.
It takes the focus entirely off of who is the loudest guy in the room or who holds the most power and puts it squarely on who is willing to absorb the blame when things go wrong.
And that is the emotional and philosophical core of the entire text. True masculinity in this specific theological framework is not about exerting dominance.
Right.
It's about having the internal strength to say, the buck stops with me. I will absorb the blame, I will take the guilt, and I will protect those under my care, even at great cost to myself. It is a complete 180-degree inversion of the self-serving nature of the first Adam.
So we have this powerful metaphor of the two Adams. The first Adam shifts the blame, the second Adam absorbs it. But the speaker doesn't just leave this in the realm of ancient theology.
No, he grounds it.
Yeah, to prove why this shift from passivity to active responsibility is so critical, he grounds his argument in some really startling modern statistics.
The sermon moves from theology directly into sociology here.
Okay.
The speaker cites a demographic study looking at children and whether they continue in the Christian faith as they enter adulthood.
Okay.
And the study bases its findings entirely on which parent was the primary one bringing the children to church.
The numbers are staggering. The source states that if both the husband and the wife bring the children to church together, there is an 80% chance those kids will continue to follow the faith into adulthood.
Which makes sense. A unified front provides a strong, consistent model, so an 80% retention rate is highly logical.
But then the data splits. If only the father brings the kids, meaning the mother stays home, there is still a 70% chance the child continues in the faith.
The retention rate barely drops.
Barely drops. But if only the mother brings them and the father stays home, the chance drops drastically. It plummets to just 30%.
From 70% down to a 30% chance?
Why? I mean, what is the actual mechanism behind that massive drop? Why does a mother taking the kids alone result in a 30% retention rate while the father doing it alone holds steady at 70%? It feels incredibly unbalanced.
It does. Sociologists who study religious demographics often look at this through the lens of authority modeling and societal structures.
Okay, unpack that.
In many traditional family structures, children perceive the father as an arbiter of what is required for the real world.
Right.
So when a father treats faith or moral instruction as a mere hobby, something suitable for his wife and kids, but not necessary for him, the children internalize that value system as optional.
Oh, wow. So they see him opting out.
Exactly. If the perceived authority figure in the home demonstrates that he doesn't need this framework to navigate life, the children eventually conclude that they don't need it either.
But when he goes?
Conversely, when the father actively endorses and participates in it, it validates the mother's efforts and signals to the children that the framework is essential.
That dynamic perfectly underscores the speaker's urgent plea for men to stop shifting the burden. Because the sermon acknowledges that mothers are out there doing incredible heavy lifting work.
Unbelievable amounts of work.
They are often unfairly burdened with having to be both the nurturing mother and the family pastor because the man is completely checked out.
Yeah, to use the earlier analogy, these mothers are being forced to drive the car from the passenger seat because the dad is sleeping behind the wheel.
That's a great way to put it. But the statistical reality the speaker is highlighting is that a father's active spiritual leadership, or his active passivity, has a disproportionately massive impact on the trajectory of his children.
Massively.
When a man plays the role of the first Adam, remaining passive and shifting the spiritual burden, he isn't just making his wife's life harder on a daily basis. He is mathematically jeopardizing his children's future.
He's literally halving their chances of carrying on the family's values. But, the inverse is also true. When he steps up, when he becomes the active, engaged family pastor, the entire family structure thrives.
And the speaker does take a moment near the end to offer a lifeline to men who might be feeling crushed by this standard. Because, let's be real, he acknowledges that practically nobody had a perfect earthly father to model this for them.
No one.
Some fathers were absent, some were abusive, some were just deeply flawed.
Right, and the speaker's point is that your past does not have to be your prison. You don't have to repeat the cycle of the first Adam just because that's what was modeled for you.
You can break the cycle.
Exactly. He encourages these men to look past their own flawed upbringings and consciously choose to imitate the Heavenly Father, to break that generational chain of passivity.
So if we synthesize all these threads, this deep dive has explored a vision of fatherhood that is undeniably demanding. It argues that true fatherhood doesn't start with the kids. It starts with being an intentionally good husband to their mother.
Right. It demands the daily, active steering of discipline.
Not the explosive anger of a teacher handing out an unfair pop quiz.
No, the constant, gentle nudges of a parent with their hands placed securely over yours on the steering wheel.
And above all, it requires a complete rejection of the first Adam. It means refusing to be a guest in your own home. It means never shifting the blame to your partner just to save your own ego.
Yes.
Instead, it asks men to embrace the model of the second Adam, to be the one who steps forward, absorbs the guilt, takes the responsibility, and sacrifices his own comfort to protect the people relying on him.
It is a heavy burden to carry, but the frameworks and statistics cited in the source suggest it's the exact burden required to fundamentally anchor the next generation.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, I want you to really reflect on this framework in your own life, regardless of whether you have kids or what your background is. Where are you acting like a guest in your own home or even in your workplace?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
Where are you sitting back, passively watching things go wrong, and then shifting the blame instead of owning the responsibility?
It's always easier to be passive. It's much harder to reach out and grab the wheel.
It truly is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked entirely about family dynamics today, but imagine scaling this concept up.
Okay.
If the absolute highest form of leadership is actively absorbing guilt to justify others like the second Adam, rather than sacrificing others to justify yourself, how would applying that mindset fundamentally transform the toxic dynamics we see in our modern workplaces, our politics, and our communities today?
That'll change everything.
What actually happens when the leaders we elect or the bosses we work for decide to stop pointing fingers and finally say, put the blame on me?